Hello and welcome to today's webinar, co-hosted by Rails to Trails Conservancy's Trail Expert Network and the Circuit Trails Coalition. My name is Mary Ellen Kuntz. I'm the Manager of Trail Resources here at RTC. Our topic for today is redefining safety on trails, creating safe, inviting, and inclusive spaces for all. With that, I'll hand it off to Anya.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon. My name is Anya Soretsky, and I'm the project manager for the Circuit Trails at RTC. As many of you know, trails are generally safe places. However, negative perceptions of safety and negative experiences do exist. And it is important for those perceptions and experiences to be heard and taken seriously. Amid the public health crisis of COVID-19, 2020 has taught us that trails are an ever important resource for communities to safely access recreation and transportation. Through the renewed calls for racial justice, this year has also reminded us that trails must be inclusive places where all users feel welcome and safe. Today, we will explore what safety means for all trail users and how trail managers can work with their communities to make that vision into a reality. I am honored to be joined today by our panel of experts from across the country who are here to share their expertise around promoting safe and inclusive trails for everyone. Paul Gordon, Senior Transportation Planner for Bucks County, Pennsylvania's Planning Commission. He is calling in by phone. Harry Tapia is the Director of Operations at the Hispanic Association of Contractors and Enterprises in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Stasia Montero is the Director of the Neighborhood Advisory Committee Program, also with ASE. And Ursula Sandstrom. She is the Outreach Manager of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association in Washington, D.C. And Najari Smith, Founder and Executive Director of Rich City Rides in Richmond, California. Each of our panelists will provide a brief introduction to their work, and then we will open the topic up to discussion. So again, please ask any questions in the comment box on the right-hand side of your screen at any time, and our team will try to get to as many questions as we can during the question and answer portion of the webinar. So now I would like to turn the mic over to Paul, who will tell us how he is dispelling misperceptions around crime on trails.
Thank you, Anya. When I was asked to speak today, I recognize there are several different elements of safety and crime on trails that people need to be aware of, and obviously some of these are somewhat lighthearted, but it is an issue that we run into as we assist municipalities with their own trail planning efforts, as well as the county trail planning. Next slide, please. And one specific project that this recently came up on for the county is that we are in the process of converting the former Fox Chase Newtown rail line here in the Philadelphia suburbs into a rail trail. And there are 5 municipalities that lie along this route, and they represent about 20% of the county's population. When we initially started our outreach to the municipalities back in 2016, we received the support of 4 of the 5 municipalities, but one municipality withheld their support based on concerns about crime, property values, and a host of other issues. And so one thing that we were challenged with was trying to convey to the residents and the municipal officials that crime is oftentimes misperceived along trails. So we really wanted to provide them with some factual information, because other studies we had presented to them on this topic were perceived as being out of date or not specific to this region. So that was really the focus of our project. Next slide, please. So really what we did, I won't spend a lot of time on this because there was a lot that went into this. And again, I'll be happy to speak with anyone who's interested in understanding it more in detail. But the specific area that the trail would traverse is surrounded by mostly single-family residential properties, along with some townhouses, and as well as some condominiums. So what we really wanted to do was make our comparison specific to those types of housing types. And we also wanted to kind of look at crime that was happening in the residential areas immediately adjacent to trails, versus the surrounding municipality. So with that, we also wanted to take a delve into what types of crimes were occurring so that, we could understand if, drug dealing was more or less of a problem on, trails or on, adjacent to properties versus other areas. And we used a variety of data sources to do that. So that's good. Next slide. So there were two specific trails here in the Philadelphia area that we looked at as similar trails. One being the Pincy Trail, which is in Haverford Township, which lies west of Philadelphia. And we looked at basically 9 to 10 months of data from late 2018 through early 2019, or excuse me, October 2019. And when we looked at this, what we found is that really the incidence of crime was slightly higher than that of the remainder of the township. But again, as you can see from the numbers, there were a total of 9 arrests and crimes combined across 141 housing units. So again, 9 is not a very large sample size to be basing our findings on. So we did then want to look at the next slide, please. Another rail trail in the area, which is the Radnor Trail. And this we had much more robust data because we were looking at nearly 4 years of information. And for this, what we found is that really the incidence of crime for properties adjacent to the Radnor Trail versus the remainder of the township were not significantly different. You could call 11.4% less than 13.2, but again, at 54 incidents, it's still somewhat of a small sample size, but we did, like I say, see that overall the rates of crime and arrest for properties adjacent to trails were not, substantially different. And then more importantly, as you look off to the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see that, again, the houses adjacent to the trail account for 5% of housing units, but only 4.4% of arrests and 4.3% of crimes. And of the 8 arrests that occurred for properties adjacent to the trail, none of those were drug related, where of the 173 in the township, 20 were drug related. So again, that was kind of, this is just really a top level glance at our research. There was much more that went into it, but it does give you the sense that, again, crime is not drawn to trails, in other words. So that's really what we wanted to convey. And again, I'll be happy to answer any questions to this once we get to the question and answer session. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Harry and Stasia will tell us about their program to promote safety on and off the trail.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Harry Tapia. Again, as Anya mentioned, Director of Operations at ASAI.
I'm Stasia Montero, work with the NAC program and community members in Philadelphia.
Perfect. We work in Philadelphia, so it's a very urban, neighborhood. We have about 20,000 residents in the 1 square mile that we service. Next slide, please. The way that we approach safety in our area and then, of course, in our trails is through our comprehensive community development plan. We usually have 10-year neighborhood plans. We're currently on our 3rd, and it's called the ASAI 2025 neighborhood plan.
Yeah, and so our resident-led neighborhood planning processes elevate local voices in shaping neighborhood change in the areas that we serve in order to provide community-driven responses to local safety issues. And as we continue to develop, we ensure that there's a host of commercial and residential economic opportunities that support our current residents in enjoying those benefits long into the future. Next slide, please.
All right, this is some of our recent work. So the Gurney Street Trail is part of the Richmond Industrial Longer Trail that we are currently developing. And it, sort of align with that, it's really our affordable housing development. So the way that we approach our trails is really, having the connectivity with all of the community assets. And for us is, the development of low income and senior housing that we have in the Fairhill neighborhood. Next slide, please.
One of the strategies that drives our work is CPTED, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And this is combined with this is a physical design approach that helps to minimize opportunities for crime and promote safety, which we then pair with safe growth strategies, which are people-based strategies to support local safety. And we'll talk more about that a little bit. Next slide, please.
All right, these are some photos of our current Gurney Street Trail. So as you can see, the one in the middle with some of our staff members jumping in the air, that was a grand opening of our trail. It went from a drug-infected embankment. It was a $5 million project between the City of Philadelphia, Conrail, who owns the rail lines, ASA, and other nonprofits in the area. Next slide, please.
So when we talk about involving community members and having resident-led neighborhood change, we use a host of strategies to do this. And one of our programs is the Livability Academy. And this is a place where we explicitly teach SEPTA and safe growth strategies, among other skill sets, to community members who are then implementing projects in the neighborhood to promote neighborhood safety using all those strategies. And ASA continues to work with a host of funders to invest in the projects that community members design through the Livability Academy. Every year we have multiple cohorts, and usually we do a spring and a fall session, and we aim to graduate approximately 50 participants every year. So again, this is a really creative and unique program, and we love this program to help community members lead the change in the neighborhood. Next slide, please.
Again, as Stasia and I mentioned, we really work through our neighborhood plan, right? That's really how we really approach our safety strategy in the trail that we're developing. And, you know, of course, the connectivity to other programs is really what's key, and how to, you know, get residents involved in order to make sure that our trail stays safe. Some of the other initiatives that we're working on is open space. So we have the American Street rail yard that we're working on, Willow Park. We are also working on commercial corridors that are adjacent to our trails. You know, we're also working on other affordable housing, and then we're currently working on a Good Lands Trust project so that we can bring home ownership. But all of it is connected in how we develop and how we approach the redevelopment, which is really through a partnership with the residents that are on the ground. Next slide, please.
And so, as you can imagine, there's so much more to say. We wanted to offer our contact information if you're curious to learn more about the programs we work through, and happy to answer your questions during the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that great information, Harry and Stasia. Now I'd like to turn it over to Ursula, who will describe the Washington Area Bicyclist Association's Trail Ranger program.
Hi, my name is Ursula Sandstrom. I'm the Outreach Manager for the Washington Area Bicycle Association, as Anya mentioned. Since 2015, one of my roles has been managing the DC Trail Ranger program, which has paid field staff doing outreach and maintenance on DC's urban trails. I'm here today specifically to talk about how running trail programs and getting had an audio flip there. Getting anywhere close to comprehensive on physical, emotional, mental safety for all trail users requires thinking about race, gender, and other lines of power and oppression in our societies. One statistic, 1/3 of Americans killed by police are disabled, and within that also predominantly Black or Native folks. If we are not thinking about the specific dangers to Native disabled trail users and the many other specific risks for that harm specific communities, we're not ensuring trail safety. So for the DC Trail Ranger program to understand and follow through on comprehensive trail safety, we start with focusing on hiring, training, and good program policies. Next slide. So for hiring, setting us up for success, we hire for people skills. I can train you how to remove trash and be nice to the tree while doing vegetation, but neighborhood lived experience, those interpersonal skills, self-awareness, and the ability to thoughtfully navigate conversations across lines of difference are much harder to train. And there are a lot of folks that have those fantastic skills that you can hire. And that sets the expectation, but orientation and further training set the stage for the team to have actionable knowledge for their job. So it's making the implicit explicit. What mistakes, assumptions, baggage do trails, riding a bicycle, or the DC Trail Ranger program have for particular trail communities? What kind of context or assumptions are employees potentially walking into so they know what's going on? And then we set baseline facts about transphobia, ableism, autism, racism, and more, so that we all have a common understanding, and then a conversation about what that really means for the job. Next slide. So for the job, that means we have program protocols and management that is more likely to be oppression aware. We can talk about, hey, what does it mean if a trail user sexually assaults or sexually harasses an employee? What does that employee want others, potentially, the men on the team, to do or not do? What do we do with trail users that are being rude or dangerous to deaf employees? We could have more complete conversations about safety and others with trail users, because trail users probably don't have to explain as much potentially to employees. Our 911 policy is short but nuanced. If the victim is capable, they get to decide if 911 gets called, and the team must consider the full implications of what calling 911 could mean for everyone involved, and seek other options first. This reduces program complicity in racist 911 calls, and keeps everyone hopefully safer. Our maintenance can be nuanced and responsive. We're not complicit in broken windows informed work, especially when it comes to graffiti. And most importantly, we can be hiring folks with specific lived experiences. We can add more things that are just kind of a yeah, duh to our programmed operations of what is safe and what is not safe for lots of different folks. And next slide. I wanted to go over quickly. We ran a focus group in DC this fall, WABA and Rails to Trails, funded by the DC Trail Ranger program. And I highlighted a few trends. Many of these might be stating the obvious if this is your lived experience. Kind of as hinted above, all participants cited safety or crime as a concern, though nobody in this focus group had personal experience, a really strong perception. General trend was that white participants were worried about what others were up to, and Black participants about what others might think or do to them. None of the men worried about harassment. It was a concern for the women. This study did incorrectly assume a gender binary, unfortunately. And police presence was perceived somewhat mixed. Negative concerns were fear of personal safety, specifically for Black respondents, fear for others' safety, and signaling that crime had occurred. I think the most important thing for many of the white dominant organizations on this call, WABA included, is what that means to have white trail users who are so focused on others' behavior, and what that means for trail safety for folks of color. There are trail lighting, other things are important, but if we're not also working to stop racist 911 calls, verbal harassment, other harm, we're not being complete in our trail safety work.
Thank you so much, Ursula, for sharing those insights. Next, last but not least, I'm going to turn it over to Najari, who's going to teach us about how Rich City Ride works with on-trail programming to promote safety.
All right, yeah, Rich City Rides. We use bicycles as vehicles for healthy civic change. My name is Najari, and I first and foremost want to acknowledge here in Richmond, California, the land that we reside in here is Native Ohlone land, um, and also the home of one of my favorite trails, which is the Richmond Greenway Trail. Next slide. This is us gathered up in a park. This is Unity Park in Richmond, California. Rich City rides, along with 16 other community organizations, came together to build this park, which is once a vacant lot. The community here takes extreme ownership of this park. This is where we host bicycle repair workshops, park cleanups monthly. We have bike clubs for youth, veterans, and we're launching one for the seniors. This ride here was one that we were doing for census outreach. And this is also comprised of our youth bike club, who helps with ride marshaling for the ride to keep everybody safe. They also help with the refurbishing of bikes. We provide bikes to anybody who needs one. And if the person comes on 1 to 4 rides, we tell them to take that bike home. To date, we've given out over 2,300 bicycles to community members. And myself, living in the community, along with our staff, we have the honor of seeing people that we've given bikes riding on their own or coming back and bringing their family members. It's really powerful for us. And being able to have that on the ground assessment of our community, doing it from like a standpoint of, okay, there's nothing there. What can we do with that lot? Or what would make this place a lot more fun, enjoyable, and welcoming? Next slide. So this photo here is also from the trails. This is one of the largest rides that we did for that year. I think this is back in 2017. This is along the Ohlone Greenway Trail, which goes through starts in Richmond and traverses like several cities. A lot of the folks that join us on our rides become advocates. They start off riding with Rich City Rides, and we introduce them to things like the Richmond BPAC, or we invite them to become more involved in all other aspects of civic advocacy through organizations who are part of the Our Power Richmond Coalition. We find that when people ride more together, when they get to know each other, it makes the whole community more cohesive. I've seen folks that never knew each other, that know each other, just off of doing these bicycle rides. And I've been able to see those friendships kind of grow over the past 8 years. Next slide. We also learned is that we've seen with the things that make trails not safe: dark, empty trails, dumping, homelessness, harassment from police. As I said before, by having people engage these trails more often and doing so together, it allows them to vision out like what does a safe trail, what does it take to make a trail safer? We've done a number of nighttime rides where it's just different riding it in the morning as opposed to riding it at night. What we've learned through the work that we do is that the things that make trails safe as well as community safe are culture shifting activities, engagement, safe infrastructure, affordable housing, and services for mental health and addiction. These are the answers. These are part of the answers for creating safe trails and safe communities. Next slide. If you have any questions, this is a link, the address to the Rich City Rides website. Feel free to send me an email, and that's the number where we can be reached. You can find out more about what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Najari. That was great. Now I'd like to start the Q&A portion of our webinar. So presenters, this is going to be a bit of a lightning round, so please keep your questions to 60 seconds. So the first question is for Najari. Najari, can you talk a little bit more about how trail managers can involve the community in creating safer, more welcoming trail environments, particularly for people of color?
Tell me that question one more time, please.
How can trail managers involve the community in creating safer, more welcoming trail environments, particularly for people of color?
By supporting the organizations that get people involved and engaged with the trails. You know, that's, if you don't feel like you're welcome on the trails, you're not gonna get on the trails. So that's one way of doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, the next question is for Ursula. How do feelings of safety differ depending on the identity of the user?
So I gave a few highlights in the presentation before. The basics is that all of us have things that we think about or don't think about because of the various parts of ourselves and because of who has power or who has had power in society. I'm going to list a few more, but quick prod to do your research. One, white disabled, non-disabled, white collar cis woman is not going to be sufficient on all the things. Exploring social identity wheels is a great way to guide your thinking. If you have not read anything by Kimberly Crenshaw, please do. She created the term intersectionality and is doing incredible and important work. But questions that trail rangers have had. You know, are trail users going to call the cops and then have the cops murder deaf employees because they're up to no good by cutting vegetation, not responding to folks talking to them, and they're just doing their job? Will someone misgender a program participant? If someone rides by a femme perceived trail ranger and slaps them on the butt, what do we do? If someone takes a photo without consent of an employee, is that sexual? Is that because they think the team's up to no good and they want to report them to government? Is it just because they think the team's doing cool stuff and they want to share? Height and size, is everyone can see on the trail? If a trans woman sees a particular graffiti, is she gonna panic? Language barriers, ice, fatigue, balance issues, vision. There are a lot of, humanity is broad, and we all have different things about us, and all of that can impact trail experiences. So if you are just thinking about the things that make you feel safe, that you're missing a lot of other things that should be there. And just to reiterate, other folks on the trail can feel safe, that kind of front stoop theory of Jane Jacobs, but it can also feel really scary. Like, are they going to rob you or worse? So the humans are a large part of trail safety, and we are a complex species with a lot of history and baggage and not great stuff we need to fix.
Absolutely. A lot to unpack there. Thank you, Ursula. The next question is for Stasia. Why must crime be addressed both on and off the trail to be effective?
Thanks for asking that question. So yeah, I mean, if we're not talking about addressing crime and safety in a comprehensive way, then we're talking about displacing it, which is not a solution. So in order to actually, you know, arrive at sustainable solutions for these things, we need to have more deep grassroots engagement with our neighbors, and we need to involve them in making the plan for how to resolve crime and safety issues. So that's, you know, when we talk about Livability Academy, that's one of the main ways that we do this. We have direct instruction, but we also have, you know, sort of project and problem oriented, you know, learning. So folks are working together, combining minds and experiences to come up with the best possible solutions for safety in the neighborhood. And this, you know, helps to promote a resident agency and decision making about what happens in their neighborhood. And conversely, when we don't offer these opportunities, we see a lot of hopelessness from people in the neighborhood because they feel like they don't have a way to affect the things that are affecting them. So, you know, we look at this as building social cohesion, collective efficacy, and see that as integral to holistic safety, equitable neighborhood transformation, and you know, making sure that the lived experiences of our neighbors are directly informing solutions for crime and safety.
Thank you, Stasia. The next question is for Najari. We touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to get a little more information from you. What should the relationship be between the trail and law enforcement? What alternative strategies can be considered?
So one thing, there there was a situation that we had right there at Unity Park that we were able to advocate to have built. You know, something I didn't mention is that we were able to pay 56 community members, residents, a livable wage to help in the design of that park. You know, one of the youth in our programs, he looks at this, he'll point to the playground and talk about how his brother helped design that playground. Well, we have bathrooms there, and we built the bathrooms so that kids could use them. Unfortunately, they weren't. The people keep breaking into the doors. We had a situation where somebody was like, you know, loitering, living in the bathroom, and we had contacted the police. You know, for one, it took the police a long time to get there. When they finally did get there, you know, we were able to get the guy out of the bathroom, but you know, he needed more help than that. And the police, you know, they took him out of there, but they didn't arrest him. And I don't even think arresting him arresting him wouldn't have been the answer to helping this gentleman. What he needed was mental health services, a place to live, and you know, assistance with getting over his drug addiction. And those were things that the police were not able to provide. So what resulted is, as soon as the police left, a half hour later, he went back to the bathroom, just broke right back in. So, you know, you ask me like, what's the relationship between trail users and the police? Well, it's good for the police to be able to come when we call them. But I think the better question is, what other services do we need in order to keep the trail safe for the users? And those are the things that are missing. You know, we need mental health services. We need more affordable housing. We need transition services for people who are homeless to be able to have a permanent place to live. And we need all of these services that'll help welcome them back into, you know, productive living.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, Harry, how does the design and maintenance of a trail impact the safety of a trail, real and perceived?
Yeah, so usually what we tend to do is really work directly through our Livability Academy. to make sure that as we're working with the architect, we do have residents that are on the ground that are users of the space, to make sure that we are, identifying all safety aspects of the design when we build even an open space or a trail, to make sure that, it is safe, not just, that it's safe, and it's also perceived safety, because if it doesn't seem like a safe space, then we know that we're going to have a hard time having non-traditional trail users use the trail. So that's usually how we start. We don't just automatically get resident input. What we do is, we do get resident input through surveys and make sure that we collect that information, but we also seek out the residents that we've trained around safety, around CPTED, around planning, to make sure that they're not just participating, but they're participating at a high level, where they're having in-depth conversation with the architects and really pushing back on the architects to make sure that the space is as safe as possible for all to enjoy. And that can be anybody from a child to an older resident, to make sure that, again, we think of all residents that are potential users for the space.
That's great, Harry. It's so important to have that participation. All right, the next question is for Paul. What changes can be made on the trail for those with differing abilities or lower stamina to avoid an emergency situation?
Okay, great question. First and foremost, all of our trails that we're working on, as well as should be, the case, if possible at all, is to design them to all be ADA compliant. And as part of that, I'll look into providing benches and seating, including, adjacent concrete pads adjacent to benches for wheelchair users. And again, if you can, provide benches as well. And then lastly, if an emergency does occur, make sure that, you provide emergency location markers along the trail that are linked into the local emergency responder network, and that they know where the closest access points along the trail are, so that if an emergency does arise, they can get to them very, very quickly. So, all right.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Paul. All right, I want to go back to Harry. Harry, how can we encourage non-trail users to use trails who may be concerned about their safety?
Yeah, again, really, our residents are our network. And I always, again, we're really big on resident involvement. So it's really working with our partners, which are folks with their feet on the ground. I know that other CPTED and Safe Growth initiatives, what they've done before, they started this walking group, these older ladies, that was called the Soul Steppers. And that's really how they encourage other folks to join them. So every day, they walked this park that was, overrun with crime, in order to deter that activity and make the park safe. And they achieved that, and that was in New Orleans. So it's really relying on your partners, and which in cases is the residents, and give them incentives in order to start, the use of the trail in a safe way.
Great, thank you. All right, the next question is for Paul. You mentioned that you had some NIMBYs during your trail development process. So how did you address those concerns from residents at the time? And then once the trail was constructed, did those opinions change?
Well, what we've tried to do, and what's seemed to be most effective, is to really try to provide them with corollary trails in the area that they can either go and visit themselves, but also that they can understand, okay, yes, I see how that is similar to the trail that you guys are developing, and try to provide them with as much factual information as possible. And then similarly, we haven't really had an opportunity to understand if attitudes have changed, because we've really only recently opened our first rail trail in the area. But one thing that we are seeing with the trail that I mentioned, the Newtown Rail Trail, is that initially a lot of the residents were requesting fencing be provided along the trail. And at the same time, we're now running into situations where neighbors, say 3 or 4 houses down from those neighbors, are saying, well, can you leave a gap in the fence? Because we really want to be able to access the trail. So it's kind of trying to balance those two needs that, you know, some people are saying, yes, we really want access. Others are like, no, 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 no. We don't want any people anywhere near our trail. So, but yeah, hopefully over time, like I say, we will be able to experience that, like I say, mind shift that people, once the trail is really starting to be utilized on a frequent basis, that they'll see, okay, you're right. This is not the end all be all in terms of the end of the world that we thought it might be.
Yeah, seeing is believing for sure. Thank you, Paul. Okay, I want to go back to Najari. How can trail managers address the weaponization of police against Black people?
I mean, I think part of that is police accountability. You know, like if police comes to this, once the police arrives, they should be assessing the situation. You know, and also holding the person who made the call accountable as well. Was this just were they intentionally weaponizing the police against this person? And you know, I mean, that's, you know, I've always been in favor of stronger police commissions so that we can hold police accountable for those decisions. In addition to that, I think that it's that goes back to the whole engagement process. If you have, you know, like who's using the trail, you know, like if you see that, you know, just from a public aspect, if you see the situation and you can actually stand on the side of the person that's being harassed or weaponized against, then that's powerful. But that takes more people, more eyes on the trail. So yeah, stronger police commissions to hold the police accountable, and also police that hold the people that are doing the calling accountable as well.
So important. All right, Ursula. What are your community's concerns about trail safety versus what incidents actually occur on the trail?
So we have, I mean, people are concerned about lots of different things. We have the generally up to no good loitering, you don't look like me, therefore I'm scared of you, racist bent. I mean, folks speeding, you know, physical assault, sexual assault, and, you know, like unlit, remote, isolated trails, especially if you don't know exactly where you are and how that could connect to the road network or how you could potentially like escape, you know, can feel scary. And, you know, all of that happens on trails. I mean, trails are part of our larger geography and larger like society and humans. And so, you know, people call the cops on folks that they shouldn't. Robbery and assault does happen. People speed and crash into people because they're not paying attention or they're being incredibly negligent. Everyone in our focus group had those trail safety concerns, but no one it was a group of 20, so pretty small sample size here. No one had particular experience with crime or violence, and there's a lot more fear about the like big and scary and unknown of, you know, assault on your body, and a lot less on those kind of more mundane. It's just kind of part of our risk ecosystem, so we don't think about it, of potholes or like not having enough food and bonking and not having like be able to think straight because you haven't had enough water or food, and some of those like kind of regular day-to-day things that are potentially something that could harm you. So concerns tend to be much more magnified of a few particular things versus kind of what is actually happening on the trail.
Thanks for sharing that insight, Ursula. All right, now I want to open it up to everyone. Is there anything on your mind that you think we should address that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I can share just like, I think Ursula speaks to this point when she mentions like how different identities inform different perceptions of safety, which is to say that safety is a very expansive term and there's always more to learn from the people we serve and to understand and incorporate into the work that we do to shape public spaces. So like, just to say more on this a little bit is just that we see the disparities in investment manifest, disparities in safety. And so we need to prioritize more equitable solutions for investment and safety and help to transform these legacies of discrimination that continue to play out and yeah, are often invisibilized and exclude people from the public realm.
Well said, Deja. Anybody else want to speak your mind while we have the chance?
I'll jump in for a little bit. So when I think about, the whole situation with the bathroom, and that wasn't the only situation where we had an issue with somebody that was suffering from mental illness. Why can't I think we need to consider why we didn't have a phone number of somebody that specialized in mental health services to call, to contact, to handle the situation. Somebody that could take this person and direct them to the services that they need. And if we don't have those services, well, we should figure out why, and not even figure out why. Let's find out how we can get those services or make those services available. So looking beyond, yeah, we have an issue. What is the solution, and how can we implement that solution? Because that's a member of our community too. They need help, and as a community, we should be looking for ways to help them. They're also using the trail, but they're having a different experience. So I'm looking for we need to consider more compassionate, holistic solutions to issues like that.
Thank you, Najari. So important. All right. Any last thoughts before we go to audience questions? All right. Then I am going to check out what's been submitted so far. So the first question is a type of safety we haven't talked about yet. This person would like to know how trail managers have responded to safety measures around COVID-19. So, Paul, would you feel comfortable answering this?
That's, again, we've really only recently opened up our first trail outside of a county park facility, but as part of COVID-19, our Parks Department, initially immediately responded to all the county park and recreation facilities. Initially, shut down all the park facilities. Then, as the summer wore on, we opened up some of the trails within the county parks, and they're still open today because, we know that there's a huge demand for that. But, other than that, there really weren't, wiping down playground equipment, how effective is that going to be? Because as soon as, one person leaves, the next person comes. But I was really just making sure that everything we did was in line with what the current prescribed COVID recommendations were. So.
Thank you, Paul. All right. I'm going to give this question to Stasia. It's about SEPTED. Some people have criticized SEPTED for being discriminatory. Are there ways that communities can address some of those concerns?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And it definitely, I mean, a lot of strategies are all conceived by a certain group of people that do not represent all people. So we have to be critical about like how do we implement SEPTED and safe growth strategies to be truly fair and representative in our neighborhood. So that's part of why we involve community members in learning these strategies and then deciding for themselves what actually will work in the neighborhood. So not everything that is a part of SEPTED is going to be a part of the decisions that they make. They're going to decide for themselves what makes sense. So yeah, again, I think just making sure that the people you serve are also shaping the decisions that are made is a big way to do that.
We hear you loud and clear. Community involvement, so important. All right, I am going to give this question to Ursula. How do you get funding for your Trail Rangers program?
So DC Trail Rangers are funded by DC government. So we have a contract with Department of Transportation. And right now it is a 6-month seasonal program, just because that's kind of how the budget shakes out. Prince George's County, which is next to the district, is launching Trail Ambassador program, something similar this year. So that will also and they are going to be Prince George's County employees. So that's something that WABA pushed really hard for. But they are going to operate kind of internally. I think for the district, I found it really helpful to have the DC Trail Ranger contract kind of be. There's a lot of advantages to being operated by WABA. And kind of being that keystone and connector between a lot of different government agencies that are responsible for different parts of trail operations and trail maintenance, because there's just it's the district. So there's National Park Service and there's lots of other DC government agencies that handle different things. And so we can be a little more flexible in deciding who to poke about, please fix the street lights, or whatever else. But yeah, we're government funded, and I feel very strongly that is important, because this is a thing for all of us, and is something that is part of kind of operations of our community, and should not be some sort of philanthropic sort of thing, because trails need to be maintained.
Absolutely. Najari, I think the audience also was interested in hearing about how your programming is funded. I'm sure there's some jealousy about being able to provide bikes to people and helmets. Oh, Najari, you are on mute, I think.
Oh, there we go. We do fundraising. It's philanthropic organizations that donate to us to allow us to do the work that we do. Chorus Foundation has been really big with supporting our work. San Francisco Foundation, and our individual donors. From our membership. That's how we've been able to one, be able to pivot towards the needs of the community. Like, we took our bike clubs, and when we weren't doing rides, we had them doing a food lunch giveaway program that they did in Quinn in partnership with the West County School District was really powerful. We were able to provide the youth with stipends for doing that work, and they kept the youth clubs together throughout throughout that period of time. But yeah, we rely on donations, and we do a lot of fundraising in order to refurbish these bikes. You know, people donate the bikes, but there's a lot of work that has to go into making the bike safe. You know, it's a whole nother process. You know, that's the time of the mechanic. That takes you know, got to replace the tires, the tubes, and we won't give the bike out until it's safe and rideable.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one last question. It says, a lot of you have started out as bike advocates, but you are now community development advocates or vice versa. Keeping that transition in mind, what is one barrier you wish would be removed in order to facilitate more trail use and more safe trail use? Ursula, it looks like you have some ideas about it.
Still scheming.
Could you repeat that?
Still scheming on what my answer would be.
Okay. How about Stasia?
Yeah, can you repeat the part after barriers? Because I didn't quite hear it.
Sure. So, what is one barrier you wish would be removed in order to facilitate more trail use and more safe trail use?
Probably rigid thinking, right? When we talk about especially like white dominant neighborhoods that are like prejudging people of color, Black folks, brown folks, like and other folks who would just present as different, right? Like non-heteronormative, et cetera, you know, like I think there's a rigidity to that thinking that needs to be made more flexible. And so I think the work of doing that is going to be very involved, and that everybody has a big role to play in manifesting that. But yeah, like without more flexible and sort of compassionate ways of seeing one another, we're going to continue to run into issues where people are excluded.
Harry, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, again, I agree with Stasia, right? It's being included, right? And feel like you can go on a trail despite what you look like on the outside and just enjoy it without, you know, fearing of you know, backlash by people who actually live by the trail. So that would be probably the biggest one that, you know, I also would mention as a barrier to be removed.
Thank you. All right, Najari, I want to give you the final word. Looks like you have an idea.
Thank you. We need support from entities like the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. A lot of these homeless encampments exist right on Caltrans property. We also need the support of the county because this is encampments will move from city to city, and we need their support to help provide more affordable housing and services for the unhoused. Also, there needs to be more attention on dumping, you know, particularly I could speak for the city of Richmond. We just recently, like, you know, earlier this year, maybe late last year, discovered that nobody's being penalized for dumping. So, you know, we don't have a DA that can follow up on any dumping that happens. It's a major issue. We've been doing park cleanups. You know, imagine doing a park cleanup and 2 days later, a resident contacts you personally and says, hey, you know, it's a mess again. You know, they took photos of the license plate, they saw the person, they sent it, but nobody's there to follow up or address the matter. It's painful. So we need more help from municipalities, county, and statewide agencies to address dumping and to really take this homeless problem seriously.
Thank you, Najari. So unfortunately, we are out of time. This is a topic that we could spend an entire day discussing. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing all of your valuable insight. I hope this information will be helpful to many listening today. Please stay tuned, as Rails to Trails Conservancy will soon be publishing a toolbox page on our website on this topic, which will include links with useful resources. We also have a COVID resource page, which can be found at railstotrails.org/COVID-19. And finally, please consider joining us for 2 upcoming webinars. One is in conjunction with NV5 and eConsult on December 15th. It's titled Trails as Economic Development Tools in the Delaware Valley. And the other one is on January 14th. It is a session on Rails with Trails. So thank you again to our panelists and thank you to our attendees for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.